Hi, my name is Yuval, and this is how I made a longboard.
Almost all longboards are made from laminated plywood that has been pressed together. The first thing you will need is to set up your press by placing two long and flat pieces on a flat surface. This can be done with 2x4s or, as I used, levels. Next, a heavy box or weight needs to be placed against one side of the wood to prevent the plywood sheets from sliding around too much after they have been glued. For all longboards I've ever made, I've used 5 sheets of 1/8 ply that are cut to be 12 inches by 36 inches, but you can go as much as 40 if you'd like. Liberally apply glue to both sides of the sheets, make sure they are square, and add enough weight until the boards warp and become slightly concave. After letting the board blank dry for 48 hours, the weights can be removed and the board can be rough cut. This can be done with either a handsaw or a jigsaw, and can be done freehand, but a stencil is recommended. It is important when cutting the rough outline to cut relief cuts. This will help prevent you from cutting too deep and accidentally cutting into your deck. After the rough outline has been cut, you can go back and cut closer to your stencil lines. Here is the completed rough cut, ready to be reshaped. The board is now ready for rough sanding with 10 or 20 grit paper. Make sure to hold the paper following the contour of the board to give your board a rounded edge. This is the time to remove any deep tool marks left from the saw or other imperfections in the wood. A wood file is also a helpful tool for making sure the edges are uniform with an even line around the board. Clamping the deck in a vise helps you to see the minor imperfections that need to be removed. Next, clamp the board vertically and continue sanding. By clamping the board vertically, it is easier to make both sides symmetrical. Take a ruler or measuring tape and measure from the midline of the board to each edge and make sure it is symmetrical. After all major shaping has been completed, you can switch to 100 or 120 grit sandpaper and begin to smooth down the edges. This process is the most tedious part of the build and can be done on a belt sander if you have access to one. You can use 60 or 80 grit paper after the rough grit to speed up the process, since rough to fine grit is a large jump, but it isn't necessary. You can go as high as 200 grit paper, but since the wood will be covered with a layer of polyurethane, it won't make a difference in the final product. Here's the deck right before surface sanding. You can see that both sides are identical and the edge of the board is slightly rounded. After the edges have been fine sanded, you can begin to sand the top and bottom deck surfaces to remove any stains, excess glue, and pencil marks. It is better to start sanding the surface with 60 to 80 grit paper, since the surface should already be pretty flat and clean. After the entire deck has been sanded, add an oil-based stain. Any stain that will work with the sealant can be applied. Generally, only one coat of stain is needed. Let the stain sit for at least an hour before you prep the board for hardware. Then, using the center line, measure between 3 and 5 inches from the nose of the board and make a pencil mark to indicate your front truck placement. Then, measure about 26 to 28 inches behind the first truck inner screw holes and make a mark for the rear truck placement. Next, use a level, or by measuring, to ensure your trucks are square with each other and the board. Otherwise, the board will turn on its own. You can then drill your holes for the trucks using a scrap block of wood behind the holes to prevent blowout. Apply the first coat of urethane to the bottom of the board and give it 15 minutes to dry, or until it isn't tacky. Apply a second coat, let dry, then mount your trucks. It is always a good idea to use some sort of softer material as a spacer between the board and the metal trucks, as bare contact will damage your board over time. The deck of the board uses the same process, but requires a buildup of multiple layers of urethane. Apply a coat or two and then drizzle sand on. After that layer dries, apply more urethane and gradually increase the thickness of the coat until the sand particles become permanently embedded. Don't forget to test ride your work and enjoy never having to pay outrageous prices for a good board ever again.